This week we're having a look at the Women's Land Army, which is one of the things that people in Britain remember about the war. And we'll also look at all of the other different groups of people that found themselves dumped in the countryside during wartime. Different genders, social backgrounds and nationalities all find themselves helping out with the farm work, and they get to know each other and generally have a laugh, which is very lovely. Two groups of people I have broadly overlooked so far on the channel are women and agricultural labourers. Women have always played a very important role in the countryside, which deserves fleshing out more than we're going to do here. I think we'll do some episodes on the role of women in the future, because we tend to think of farmers as male and often quite socially conservative, which is something worth exploring. Going back in time, farm work was often gendered, so men would perform the heavier work like ploughing or scything, while women would do lighter work like harvesting with sickles, or perform what you might describe as cottage industry, spinning wool into a saleable product, making butter, things like that. Women might fulfil what we would consider a traditional gender role, keeping the house and raising children. But on top of these things, it has always, up to the present day, I would argue, been common for women to be the bookkeepers for farms and even the brains of the operation, while their husbands and sons do the physical work. Women would also do the physical work. This lady was the shepherd on her family's farm, in charge of the sheep, which she seems to have enjoyed.
I used to be the shepherd on the farm. I used to look after all the sheep, all the lambing. I used to walk miles looking after the sheep. Yes, that was...
Can you tell me anything about lambing time then? What it was
Oh,
like?
yes. They used to lamb outside and we used to have to bring them inside after they'd lambed. I mean, maybe a sheep had 3, or maybe I'd got a cade lamb, because I used to look after the cade lambs. They are when the mothers have died. So one year I had 8 cade lambs, 1 black. And I used to go for a walk. I used to have the dog, 2 cats and 8 lambs. Going up the... Mind you, there was no traffic on the roads.
No.
And I used to love these 8 lambs.
Yes.
If you look at wartime farm surveys, it's also surprisingly common to find female farmers. In most cases, they seem to be widows who continue running the farms after their husbands pass, with their children helping as labour. Instances like this prove that women's function in the countryside has never just been the traditional gender role of housekeeping, cooking and raising children. Their role has always been broader than that. We've also overlooked agricultural labourers on this channel. Before and during the Second World War, it would be typical for farms to have accommodation for workers, either with the family in the farmhouse or in separate workers' cottages, where the labourers would have space for their families and perhaps also some animals like hens or a pig or some sheep. The narrative we all know about farming during the war is that the men went to fight and women replaced them in their work. Farm labourers could go to fight, but farming was a reserved occupation, so farmers themselves weren't drafted into the military and stayed on the land during the war. But during the agricultural depression, a lot of farms stripped back to survival mode, saving money by not doing most labour-intensive jobs and relying solely on the family for that labour. But to do productive wartime farming with its ploughing and drilling and catching up on all the maintenance that had been neglected in the previous decades meant these farms needed more labour, and a lot of that came from women. The Women's Land Army had existed in the First World War, but was re-established in July 1939 by the Ministry of Agriculture, headed nominally by Lady Denman. The women in the Land Army came from all different walks of life and different lines of work, often coming from villages or towns, but sometimes cities as well. They were willing to do farm work on some level, as there were other services women could join if they wanted to, and they would be given a little bit of training when they joined the Land Army.
Oh, we had to be physically fit. But we also had a month's training. The training, in my respect, was a matter of learning how to milk, hand milk, and with it being June, there was a bit of haymaking and corn gathering to do, you see.
This lady left her job as a printer to become a forewoman in the Land Army, overseeing a hostel of 62 girls in a village called Lubbenham. She talks about how land girls were dropped off at farms at the beginning of each day, and although there were people from all different backgrounds serving in the Land Army, the less refined women were tougher.
The driver would be at the door 6:30 for the girls to get into the lorry, and they'd be deposited at various farms all along the way, previously arranged by the Agriculture Committee. See? Of course, I mean, it was very, very tiring work for them, especially when they'd been out all day threshing and things like that. They'd come home and they'd be absolutely exhausted in lots of cases. In fact, some of them, they couldn't stand it. They'd been brought up sort of in sheltered homes. They hadn't perhaps done much hard work. They couldn't all stand it. As I said before, they were each and all different characters. Now, one end of the dormitory, a notice appeared all across, East End. The other end, a notice appeared, West End. And that is, strangely enough, how they were graded. The West End ones were the more sheltered, a little bit more refined, shall we say. But they weren't as tough as the girls in the East End. they were tougher characters. But they were all very, very interesting people. They were good sports, all a lot of them, and got on very well together.
Some land girls would replace agricultural labourers in a much more literal sense, moving onto farms and living there. This lady had worked as a servant, but moved onto a farm during the war and much preferred it, and she married one of the labourers that she met there.
But it was great, really. I did enjoy it.
Were there any other girls with you, or were
No, I was the only land girl on the farm, but the men was all good. I met my husband there.
Did your husband work?
He worked on the same farm. That's where I met him. Yeah.
No wonder you enjoyed being in the land garden.
Well, you do, don't you?
Yes.
Yes. So.
But it was very different from being in service.
Oh, altogether different. It was much nicer.
And commonly the land girls would be organised in labour gangs, doing big jobs like threshing, separating the wheat from the straw. This job would typically be done by a contractor who would own a threshing drum and move it around farms.
And did you have any land girls?
Only for thrashing. They used to come in the thrashing gang when the committee, the agricultural committee, used to do the thrashing for us, you see, and then they used to send a gang of land girls as well. Well, they did a good job. And they liked thrashing because it was a communal job. All working together, you see, not like having to work on their own.
Farmers and land girls seem to have gotten on really well during the war, perhaps partly because farmers had previously lived a very solitary existence and suddenly loads of girls turned up to where they lived.
Did you have any land girls at all?
In peak times, harvesting or thrashing.
And did you get on with them? Were they nice girls?
Used to get on very well. I was a young lad then.
They all remember the land girls working well and say they were a very good help.
Basically, they weren't a bad sort, a lot of girls, and we got on reasonably well. There's some we made friends with. There was one that stayed at the farm for a year or so, and we made great friends with that one, and very close friends, like the family.
The crucial thing here is that the land girls were willing to engage with farmers and participate in the rural way of life. They integrated, and most of them liked it. Some of them stayed after the war, and others looked back and thought of life outside the land army after the war as quite boring in comparison.
Some of them, the girls who'd worked on the farm during the war, they continued until they retired. They perhaps working at a private farm. And as you say, they were treated as one of the family, they were part of the family. And they stayed on until they retired. I've met some of them since then. We've had reunions, you see. And others, of course, married the farmer's son or married a farmer, and I enjoyed it. And the fact that civilian life seemed very, very tame after not knowing what was going to come along each day.
But land girls weren't the only group of people that found themselves in British villages during the war. There were also American soldiers stationed here who liked the pubs and enjoyed going to dances. And the soldiers that interacted with farmers did so because they were interested in what was going on.
Was there any prejudice towards the Americans from Oadby villages?
I don't think so. There's quite a few girls married to them, gone out there and married to them. But a lot of them were country boys themselves, because I know some of them used to like to get out, you know, to the farms.
But as the war dragged on and the Americans were shipped over to the continent, prisoners of war were being shipped back to England. Prisoners of war fulfilled a similar role to the land army. They lived in camps, sometimes those that had just been vacated by the Americans, and they would be driven to farms or move around in gangs doing heavier work like ditching. This lady's husband was incapacitated, so she ran her family's farm during the war and needed people to do the heavy lifting, so she made very good use of prisoners when they became available.
I had to apply to the War Agricultural for assistance.
Right.
You had to pay for it. And they used to send me so many German prisoners every morning and then fetch them back every night.
Right.
But I got on well with the majority of them, I mean, a lot of them couldn't speak English. You'd perhaps only got 1 out of perhaps 10 that could talk to you.
Were they like the officers generally?
Yeah, well, it weren't it. No, you didn't get so many of it. Just working people like.
This was a really wonderful thing for British farmers because the War Agricultural Executive Committee suddenly had loads of surplus men that they could send around fixing all of the things that had fallen apart during the agricultural depression. Good use was made of this labour, particularly with drainage and ditching, with the Leicestershire Committee noting the increasing number of applications for labour which are now coming in. In this connection, the Italian prisoners of war are doing valuable work. The first prisoners farmers got seem to have been Italian, which were favourably received, but they were deemed to be lazier than their German counterparts. But they were made welcome. Apparently some farmers felt they deserved a hot meal every evening.
When we had the Italian prisoners, they used to help. Some of them liked work and some didn't. We had one once and he used to stand on the step and he was doing opera. He was singing all about opera. He was ever so funny. We had as many as 8 prisoners of war. And at mealtime, Dad never said, they can't work on sandwiches. Well, they had a hot meal at night. I mean, when you think now, my husband has sandwiches for dinner. But he said no. Some of them had to make soup, and usually rabbit soup or something like that, because you know how they like soup and stew.
These people coming into the British countryside really helped put the place back together after the agricultural depression. And just like with the land girls, farmers really liked the prisoners of war. They remember them as good workers. They left a very favourable impression. This chap remembers that they applied themselves to their work and would kepe themselves busy.
Oh, I had all sorts of prisoners of war.
Well, tell me
I
about
had 4 Germans.
Yeah.
They were grand chaps as well. One of them was a bit of a twister, but the other 3, in fact all 4, were the best workmen I've ever come across. There was nothing were no trouble to them, and if they'd got 10 minutes to spare, they'd find a job. They served me well. I got on well with them, and so did my neighbours.
And he recalled Polish labour gangs very fondly as well.
We had private contractors, and he used to bring his own gang with him, and they were all POWs, and they were real characters, they were.
How did you get on with them?
Oh, good. Oh, they were very good, they were.
In listening to these oral testimonies, you notice some themes about what people made of the prisoners of war, and one of those is that they were very talented and very resourceful. Many of them were professionals. This one was a doctor.
But after the Italian prisoners came the German prisoners. They were workers. We had one living with us. His name was Hans Keller. He was a doctor in Germany, and his sister was a dentist. I used to correspond with a sister in Germany. She was very nice.
And they would make things for the farmers. This lady had a prisoner of war on her farm called Bruno, who managed to be accused, along with his friends, of attempting to steal some binder twine, string essentially, from the War Agricultural Executive Committee. But she sides with them, and she gives them some string, and in return they make her some slippers out of it.
Bruno come and he said, row, row. So I went down, so I said to him, what's up? So one of them said, he say, we pinch binder twine. So I said to Stone, I said, what the took? He says, a ball of binder twine. I says, and where they hid it? I said, and when the lorry comes, where they going to put it? So he said, they say they make shoes. I said, they do. I said, I've got some made slippers. And I said, you can take it if you want. I said, I give it you. And they made me a pair of slippers.
And the prisoners make really intricate toys for children out of bits of scrap.
They used to make wooden toys. They made my lads a walking dog that waddled as it went along. Yeah. And then they made like little kind of scissors as the man jumped over in the middle kind of thing. They were very clever, some of them.
A lot of them were very young. I mean, some of them weren't much older than us 15-year-old children, you know. And they used to spend a lot of their time cutting out, made marvellous tin toys out of a sardine tin or a treacle tin. I've got a ship in a bottle that one made, gave to the family, I suppose, but I've kept it.
The coming of all these different groups of people must have really changed how it felt to exist within rural communities. In the agricultural depression, everything had been visibly decaying, but suddenly farmers were not only wanted and being told that their work was of value, but they had all these different groups of people thrust into what had been quite a solitary existence. People on farms got to know urban women from all different walks of life. They met soldiers from the Allied nations stationed here, and they met prisoners from the Axis nations. And because of this wonderful cultural exchange and the meaningful tasks everybody was working towards together, these people looked back on the war and considered it fun. New people, new experiences, stuff to do. With the help of the Land Army and the prisoners of war, the countryside was transformed. They did a ridiculous amount of ditching in these years. They clear out the streams and the buildings are repaired and pasture was ploughed up. A later government report described the countryside as having gone from a profound neglect to an air of busy, thriving prosperity. But I would like to contrast the positive reception of land girls and all the other different groups of people from different countries, foreigners, to the reception of evacuees, city people who were moved into the countryside to avoid the bombs. These people you've heard from were really happy to share their way of life and culture and community and homes with urban women in the Land Army, but also soldiers from all over. But those people, or at least the ones they liked most, took interest in country people and engaged with the rural way of life. But when the people who gave these testimonies think about evacuees, they take a very different tone. They talk about people from London as if they were aliens. This lady found the evacuees from London so strange that the very thought of them is enough to make her laugh.
We had the evacuees. There was some hardened cases there, but we all tried to do our best to make them welcome. You know, we looked after them as best as our abilities. I had one lot out of Parade Street, you know, near St Pancras, Tottenham Court Road. They were really funny. They really were. They'd never been used to sitting down and having a meal. They wanted fish and chips. So I said, well, you'll be very unlucky here because there aren't any. So I said, if you don't have what I've put, you just have to go hungry. I said, because I can't afford to waste food because we were so severely rationed that we hadn't anything to spare. Not to be fussy and faddy.
The urban families who moved out into villages didn't seem to integrate with the people who were already there. They don't seem to have engaged with rural life, they don't seem to have got involved, and they don't seem to have liked it.
And we had some evacuees. They were broad Londoners. And the whole family came, and they put them all in this cottage. And, oh dear, I can see them now. Oh dear, their faces, they thought they'd gone to the moon, I think. They'd never been anywhere like it, and the mother was absolutely devastated. But I often think about those poor people coming from a very crowded area, you know, city sort of thing, to a very sleepy village. It must have been awful for them.
Didn't they enjoy being out in the country?
I don't think so. No, I don't think they did at all.
White British people from cities were too different from white British people in the countryside for the two groups to get along, even while all of these different groups from different countries managed to do that. The language they use here is sometimes quite interesting. Prisoners of war from foreign countries who may not have spoken the language very well are discussed quite objectively and without prejudice, as we have seen.
Prisoners of war, did you ever have any?
Yes, we had Italians and Ukrainians, Poles, Germans. Had some two very good German chaps with us for a long while.
But British city people are different. When they move out into the villages, they are the foreigner.
What about the village? Now, you were saying in the war...
Oh, it's twice as big today, but we haven't got the villagers in. We've got what we call the foreigner.
Yeah.
The Townies come in and he tries to run it to his type of life, and no, he's not. He's got to blend into the countryside type of life.
It's interesting, isn't it, how the label foreigner and the prejudices that may go along with it weren't applied to people from different countries, but rather to British city people, just people who didn't integrate with rural culture. You think of rural life as a local thing, but as a farmer I probably have much more in common with other country people from wherever else in the world than I do with my own neighbours, the townspeople that now populate my village. The wonderful melting pot of different cultures in the countryside during the war illustrates just how savage the rural-urban divide in this country was, and continues to be. Jumping ahead a bit here, the government of the time recognises this divide and sees that it's something that must be overcome. Essentially, because during the war, the massive effort that the rural community undertook proved that they were good citizens and that culture had great social utility, and there were things that city people could learn from them. So the government tried to preserve and spread rural culture in the face of the ever-growing cultural power of the cities, which had been destroying villages before the war. This is a large part of the reason why we have national parks, so city people can go on holiday and interact with the rural way of life. Needless to say, these efforts don't really work, partly because of mechanisation, which continues to reduce the rural population, but also because city people just don't want to integrate. There is an enduring perception that farmers are stupid and unenterprising, and the very first issue of the Land Girls magazine sought to address this on its first page. There is a curious delusion that land workers are rather slower than town folk, that, like brains and brawn, cows and culture don't go together. Perhaps it all depends on what is meant by culture. There is certainly more cash and more comfort attached to the commercial or clerical city existence. Whether it also shows a better sense of values or proves the possession of superior brains is quite another matter. I think this failure to bridge the divide between rural and urban has ultimately resulted in the recent unravelling of the post-war settlement, the cheap food policy, with the reforms made by the Conservative government. Today there seems to be a great push towards food systems and styles of land management that farmers tend not to agree with, like organic farming or rewilding or veganism. These things are pushed for mostly by city people who don't have a connection to the land and have no experience managing it. You could argue with me on this, but I think this enduring cultural divide is because city people don't engage with country people. During the war, farmers proved that they were quite happy to share culture with people from all over the world, but that doesn't happen with British people from cities. And coming up to the present day, farmers do understand city people. I, for example, am something of a cultural mongrel. I am as authentically country as anybody could possibly be, but I'm also half townie, really. Most farmers are. We go to your schools, we watch your media. When I was at university, I lived in a city for 3 years. I understand what it means to be in that world. But that's unavoidable. The cultural power of the cities is such that it would be impossible to stay out of the urban world altogether, even if you wanted to. But the rural world is much smaller and much more fragile, and I don't feel there's the same level of integration and understanding coming the other way. I would like to take a moment to thank the city people who watch these. You comment occasionally and I do appreciate it. The long-term aim of this channel is to make the countryside accessible, and hopefully in doing so foster a mutual understanding and hopefully tolerance between townspeople and my people. It's a good day when I get a comment that suggests that's working. Thank you for watching. Do let me know what you think and be sure to subscribe. Next week it's a fun one. I'll see you then.